All right, good afternoon, guys. No, good evening, in fact. So let's start today's session. As we said last week, today's session is going to be dedicated to your questions and things that you need clarifications on, or also your observations, but mostly your questions. So I leave the floor to you, and we have 1 hour and 15 minutes to go through this.
Hi, Professor. So I think my first question is like more of a clarification. So we know that the more a thing possesses itself, the more tranquil it becomes and the less it searches for anything since it's fulfilled by possessing itself.
Yeah.
Does this mean that the more content a person is, then the more possessed the person is of themselves, and so they better grasp the one intuitively?
Well, we shouldn't mix the psychological with the ontological plan. What Plotinus is trying to think, first and foremost, through the notion of self-possession, is the ontological status of each thing as far as the thing is. Then it is true that there is a bridge to the, let's call it psychological level, when it comes to being a question regarding the particular kind of life the wise man can and has to lead. But that's quite another matter. The two plans do overlap in Plotinus, as I said, and the ontological plan serves as the normative plan for the, let's call it, psycho-ethical plan. However, we shouldn't fuse them immediately. Then, once we have this distinction clear in mind, we can say that indeed, looked at from the psycho-ethical point of view, the more a person, through the exercise of philosophy and wisdom, the more one has reached a level whereby he or she is secure of him, herself, the more tranquil he or she is going to be, where tranquility means the full possession of one's own being. Okay, does this satisfy your question?
Yes, it does. Then my second question is in regards to praxis. So Plotinus gave the analogy of the horses, where he said that since the horses cannot grasp the thing in its entirety, they chase after it because they know what it is that they do not have, and so they chase after it in their own way. But how does a soul for the human being come to possess things to enter into a higher act of vision? Because I also read that the logos in its attempt to possess things is an attempt for the soul to move into a higher act of vision.
Okay, so let's start from clarifying the image of the horses that Plotinus uses. I think is in chapter 6, if I'm not wrong, but I don't remember. That image comes directly from Plato's Phaedrus, which is one of the most important dialogues of Plato. And no, sorry, it comes from the Symposium, I think. And all the Phaedrus, I don't remember, either or. And the two horses are used by Plato to signify two parts of the soul. One, the black horse, symbolizes the appetitive part of the soul, the one that is led by desires and impulses from the outside. And the other one is the superior part of the soul, the one that tends towards rationality and the contemplation of ideas. So Plotinus, by using that image, is talking about the soul, to be sure. Now, how does the soul get into possession of these things? How does the soul acquire these things that it sees? It acquires them because it always had them. So the soul, according to Plato and Plotinus, is always in relation with the highest realities, hence the ideas. So it doesn't need to acquire them in the sense of getting them for the first time. It needs only to remember them, to recollect them. That is to say, to become aware again of its own possessions. And in that sense, the exercise of dialectics, hence the exercise of discursive logos, is that upward path that takes us to the reacquisition, the reconquering of the highest form of logos, which is the silent one, the one that is not discursive, which, however, as I said, we already had, we just forgot about it. We just don't live down here in awareness of it, okay?
Yep, and moving on from there, my next question would be, since human beings are characterized by parakolotima or inner doubt, then this means that they are in the realm of possibility. But as a human being grows to possess itself more, then it moves towards the realm of potency rather than possibility.
Yeah.
Then if that is so, doesn't it mean that as the human moves towards the realm of potency, then it loses parakolotima, which is the defining feature of being human?
Yeah, precisely. In fact, Plotinus' thought ends up being ultimately dehumanizing. I mean, what Plotinus wants to do as a philosophical project is to go beyond the human, okay? Because the human is ultimately understood as the most symptomatic separation from the perfect unity that is the one. And parakoluthima is just an instance of this, okay?
This brings me to my next question, because if a person lives in the realm of potency, then he cannot help but unfold in one particular way because it's no longer characterized by possibility.
Yeah.
Does this mean that does man still have free will when he is no longer in this realm of possibility?
Okay, so the notion of free will is a notion that as such has been formalized by Christian thinkers, okay? The first one, at least to my knowledge, that deals with this notion openly and deals with this notion as problematic in relation to the rest of Christian doctrine is St. Augustine. Sorry, let me just press this damn thing off. Is St. Augustine, who lived, by the way, was born a few decades after Plotinus's death and lived basically 50, 70 years after Plotinus's death. In any case, that's where the notion of free will comes into the fore of philosophical speculation with Christian theology. The ancients didn't have any formalized notion of free will. Now, it is true that you do find discussions already in the Stoics about the concept of freedom. but it's quite controversial to say that that concept already corresponds to our notion of free will. What is the notion of free will? It states that freedom consists in the ability to say yes and no to given options. That's what free will is, okay? Did the ancients have any such concept? The most important thing about this concept of free will is that the dignity of freedom is made to rest precisely in this ability to choose between one or another option. Hence, is made to rest freedom in the arbitrary. In fact, the Latin name of this concept is liberum voluntatis arbitrium, free arbitrariness of the will, okay? Now, what characterizes hence the concept of free will is the fact that the dignity of freedom is seen in the possibility of arbitrary decision. The ancients didn't understand freedom in this way. To my knowledge, as far as ancient philosophy is concerned, the treatise in which the concept of freedom is unfolded according to the mind frame of ancient philosophy is Plotinus's treatise 6.8. Okay, Ennead 6, treatise number 8, which, by the way, you can go find at the library if you're curious. That treatise is called, is entitled On the Will and Freedom of the One. What does Plotinus understand for freedom in that treatise? He understands the characteristic trait of the one whereby the one is free insofar as it is unrelated. And being unrelated, it does what it does because it does it. So is free in the sense that its potency unfolds the way it does, not out of an impulse from the outside, but because it just so unfolds. So the concept of freedom for Plotinus, the dignity of the concept of freedom, doesn't rest on the ability to arbitrarily choose A or B, but it rests on the fact that one thing unfolds according to its own way, independently of any external influence, and in a completely unrelated way to the outside or to any other thing. At this point, let's go back to your question. Does it mean that man then loses free will? Well, for Plotinus, free will is not a concept to begin with. If Plotinus were to think of this concept, he would think of it in terms of possibility, and we saw that possibility would think of in terms of parakoluthima, hence of distancing of one thing from its own being. Hence, for Plotinus, true freedom corresponds to the perfect adherence to one's potency. Okay?
Oh, I understand now. And actually that leads into my next question, which is, if a person comes to possess himself and so unfolds as potency, does such a person have any sort of mask or persona as typically described in psychology?
No, because at that point, you are not within the realm of relations, because the person, which is a concept also that Plotinus didn't have, right? But let's call it, Plotinus does have an understanding of this concept of person, even though it doesn't call it person. Plotinus refers to the human being as a double we. So he says that each of us is in reality two. One is the, let's call it, empirical us that we experience down here, that we are down here. The other one is the superior us, which represents that part of ourselves remaining stably attached to the higher dimension. So once I manage to live completely at the level of my higher self, once I operate only at that level, I have no dealing anymore with my lower self, right? And hence, I have no personhood. In other words, whereas for us, the concept of personhood is key to define the dignity of men, for Plotinus, the concept of personhood, which he doesn't have as such, but it doesn't call as such, but he has other ways to call pretty much the same concept. This concept of personhood is, in fact, indicative of a lower kind of possible being that men can live at, okay?
I think you answered a part of my previous question, like about my next question, because my next question is actually what stops men in the realm of potency from becoming, for example, animalistic. So like in the example of the dark horse where it just tends towards his animalistic desires.
To become what?
Uh,
What stops men from?
Becoming animalistic. So like chasing after what the dark horse chases after.
Oh, well, that has to do with the kind of disposition that one chooses. So there you have some kind of notion of freedom understood as arbitrariness, right? And it's something that you find already in Plato when he talks about the allotting of the various lives to the souls. So that depends on the disposition that one chooses to live in. If you seek after certain things, you are gonna, say, sex or food or pleasures of various sort, you're gonna live more and more at the level of those things and hence become like those things. If you instead choose to live at the level of the intellect, at the level of the mind, then you'll become increasingly similar to the things that are contained in this level, and hence will become one with the higher part of the mind, of the soul, okay?
So disposition is its own potency?
No, disposition is not precisely a potency. Disposition is part of what we call possibility, meaning that only the human soul is in full command of this ability to go one way or the other. The soul of a dog does doggy things. The soul of a cat does cat-like things. The soul of a human being is instead capable of swinging one way or the other. Okay? Now, the soul of the human being is still the same thing as the soul of the dog. The soul that is in a dog is a soul that, because of its choosings in a previous life, got punished by having to stay in the body of a dog. If you want to explain this at the semi-mythological / religious level, okay?
Okay, it's clearer now. Thank you, Professor.
Welcome. Okay, so now William has questions as well. Let's see, I'll read it out. Then there is Shah. Okay, two questions to both. As I've heard my notes, it is mentioned that the nous is an ability to see. I understand the physical example of the eye of focusing, or the eye focusing on something in order to see something, but could you elaborate on how the nous allows us to grasp the intelligible? It's not that the nous allows us to grasp the intelligible. The nous is the intelligible. What does it mean that the nous is the intelligible? It means that the nous forms itself as the intelligible. Now, the question is, how does this forming happen? And that's where the metaphor of the eye comes in handy. The nous, Plotinus says, is an orasis, an accomplished vision. Now, what does it mean by accomplished vision, by orasis? It means the ability to see that since it is fixed on something, is, properly speaking, vision. Before it is fixed on anything, it is not vision because it doesn't see. This way of thinking of vision, by the way, is typical to all antiquity, but the rationale of it is easy to understand. Again, as I told you when we talked about this, imagine yourselves in a dark room, in a room that is completely dark. You have eyes, so you can see. You could see, if only there were light. Because light is the thing that allows you to actually actualize your capability to see. Only once that capability has been actualized do you have vision. You do have vision. Before then, you just have a capability to see. Now, the nous is this constant, accomplished vision. But how is this vision kept in its accomplishment? By being fixated on the one. Okay? So that's it. So long story short, it's not that the nous allows us to see the intelligible. The nous is the intelligible. And we are part of the nous insofar as we think. Okay? Secondly, for the intelligible realities, such as geometrical concepts, what happens when the learned man of the day only possesses a flawed or non-comprehensive version of the true nature of what this reality actually is? How would this flawed intelligible reality interact with its true form? A simple example of it would be P Greco, whose numerical value would not be accurate. Well, the point is not, on the one hand, okay, your question on the one hand stems from a naive understanding of knowledge, okay? Because you understand knowledge mostly from the point of view of the sciences, and this latter point of view you understand in terms of accuracy. Now, how is this accuracy possible? This accuracy is possible only if you start from certain predetermined axiomatic standards. But does this accuracy that rests on axioms exhaust the domain of knowledge? No, the domain of knowledge is something much bigger, much deeper than accuracy. So, is it possible, for example, that we ask questions of accuracy regarding the nature of the triangle? No. The knowledge that we had of the triangle was perfect 3,000 years ago and is perfect now. The knowledge that we had of number 2 was perfect 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and is perfect now. It is not susceptible of any improvement through an augmented accuracy, okay? So that's the first point. The second point is not that if you have a flawed understanding of something, this flawed understanding interacts somehow with the real essence of a thing, right? The real essence of a thing remains what it is. It's not that I think that the triangle is in fact formed by 4 angles. The triangle is going to change or is going to be affected by that. I'm just going to be ignorant of what the triangle really is, right? But as I said, when we enter into the domain of the ontological level, that is to say the level of the essences of what things are, there is no more question of accuracy at play. There is instead the question of grasping what a thing is, not to measure it. In that sense, again, the wise men of 2,000 years ago who knew about triangles and blah, 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 knew about them as well as we do now. No more, no less. Okay? Then there is Shah. I have a question in regards to the one and ethos. If the ethos can appear before the nous, that the ethos forms as part of the levels of reality, how can one even think of the one without it being part of the levels of reality? If there is no ethos one, is there no ethos one? Does it mean that no matter what appears before us in regards to the one is false since it cannot be thought of? It seems that you can't understand the one and only experience it. And if that's true, then how do we know that we are or have been experiencing this without being conscious of it? All right. So these are many questions. Let's start from a clarification. It's not that there is first the ethos and then there is nous. Nous is all the ethi. And there is only one ethos. There are many ethi. Each thing that exists is an ethos. And it is an ethos insofar as it is the reproduction, so to say, of the true ethos on which it depends. So there are many ethi. And all these ethi together, which form the fabric of intelligible reality and hence the fabric of reality to occur, all these ethi together are the nous. So the emergence of the nous and the emergence of the ethi is one and the same. Now, regarding the one, is there an ethos of the one? No. The one is, as Plotinus says many times, an ethos. That is to say, it has no shape. The one is shapeless. Why does Plotinus stress this many times? Well, because otherwise the one, as Shah is saying, will become one of the things. It will collapse into one of the levels of reality. but at the point is not the one anymore, is one of the things, is not the one above everything and on which everything depends for its being, okay? Now, how do we know that we have it? Well, on the one hand, yes, this knowledge is an experience, as we said. It's not a discursive knowledge, because anything that we say about the one is false, meaning that it misses the target. And it can't but miss the target, because language is not fit to talk about the one. That's on the one side. On the other side, how do we know that we have it? Anything that is, insofar as it is and keeps on being, does so because it gravitates around the one. So in a certain way, everything that is, insofar as it is, has the one, necessarily. There is no doubt about that, all right? The point of consciousness, as we said other times, the problem of consciousness is a secondary problem that doesn't tell us really anything about the true possession of something. If by consciousness we understand parakoluthima. All right? Then Wayman, Plotinus' doctrine of emanation states that the one embodies goodness and beauty, bringing into being the source of everything in the world. With that being said, how does Plotinus understand the coming into being of evil? That's a very interesting question. That's a hoary problem in Plotinus' thought, the problem of evil. How to understand evil? Well, there are two treatises that talk about this. One is the treatise 2.4, and the other one is the treatise, I don't remember now the number, 2.2, I think, or 2.1. I have to check this up again, which number precisely. How does Plotinus understand evil? Evil for Plotinus is not a thing. Evil for Plotinus is the privation of any form, of any ethos. That is to say, the complete lack of ethos, hence the complete dissolution, that's evil. Now, sorry guys, I have to pick up this call. Hello? Yes. Yeah. Oh, no, sorry, I'm not interested. Thank you. Sorry, I thought it was the courier that has to give me something. Well, yeah, so where do we find a manifestation of evil, so to say, a manifestation of evil in Plotinus, according to Plotinus? We find it in Ili, in matter, insofar as matter is the shapeless, and if left to itself, so to say, it would never come into shape. It comes into shape under the influence exercised on it by the higher realities such as the nous, the soul, and so on and so forth, which by gravitating around the one, give it shape, give matter shape, okay? Now, what is interesting is that if you reflect on it, this thing, I don't know how else to refer to it, matter, is not another principle that stands in front of the one, but is something that as such underruns all throughout any level of reality. That is to say, also the nous has beneath it matter, insofar as the nous forms itself, it must have formed itself starting from the formless. It has shaped itself starting from the shapeless, okay? And in fact, one needs only to reflect on the metaphor that we talked about earlier, the nous as capability to see and the nous as vision. If the nous were to remain a capability to see, it would never become really nous. What is, though, that state of capability to see? Is the state whereby what is not yet nous is just an inchoate, learn this word, inchoate matter. A matter that has not been brought to shape, okay? So that's where evil is, according to Plotinus. Whereby, again, by evil, you don't have to understand something that has to do with the moral sphere, but something, again, that primarily and solely has to do with the ontological sphere, okay? Matter is evil not because it does bad things. Matter is evil because it's shapeless. And goodness equates to have shape, that is to say, to be in ethos, okay? All right.
So does matter have no place at all in the ladder of being, or is it at the very bottom?
No. As I said before, every level of reality has matter. The nous has matter. The nous is shaped noetic matter, but before being shaped, it was matter. Same thing for the soul, same thing for all the realities, anything that is, okay?
So we can effectively say that good is made out of evil, in the sense that the shapeless is shaped by an ethos.
Yeah, but again, here the paradox can stand only if you keep thinking evil in moral terms. If you instead think evil in ontological terms primarily, then what you have is just an attempt to understand how things come to standing. They come to standing out of a shapelessness which is brought into shape by a shape bearer that exercises its action on it. Okay? And by the way, if you reflect on this, this is another example of how through and through Plotinus's thought on the being of things is determined by a frame whereby at the core of everything there is the principle of causality, cause and effect, right? Then Marcel has a question. There is a desirous tending in everything towards the one. Is this desirous tending towards the one resistible or sure and certain? You mentioned that a disconnect from the one stems from forgetfulness. Does forgetfulness resist or weaken the desirous tending? Okay, again, here we have to separate the two levels, the ontological one and the moral one, the ethical one. The ethical one, of course, concerns only the human being. All of the things that are differentiated by their ability to more or less stably tend towards unity. So the highest realities are those that most perfectly tend and gravitate around the one. The lower realities, such as the things that fall into the sphere of sense perception, have a weaker tension towards the one, and that's why they fall into disintegration, basically. This being said, in the human being, there is another level whereby, exactly through an ethical stance, the human being can, from this domain, from this sphere of reality, in which disintegration of each thing has the ultimate word, the human being can instead actively pursue a counterpath whereby it goes back to the one, okay? So these are two different levels. Again, ontological and moral, they overlap, but the moral concerns only the human being, not also other things that are. Then Brian has a question. This goes somewhat outside the scope of the course, but could you comment whether Plotinus is one and the nous has an influence on St. Augustine's attempt to understand the Holy Trinity, in particular the generation procession of the Son? Of course, this has a huge, Plotinus has had a huge influence on St. Augustine. There isn't only a relationship, there is a huge influence. In fact, there is an entire current of philological studies that tend to flatten up Augustine's thought against Plotinus's thought. For certain details, I've demonstrated that that's not the case, that's not possible, because ultimately the two kind of thoughts differ extremely. And they differ, for example, in the fact that for Plotinus, as we said before, the human being as given phenomenally and empirically is something to be surpassed and to be thrown away, literally, with no value. For Augustine, instead, the human being empirical experience, and hence the historical human being, is at the center of Augustine's speculation, because it is this historical human being that is in dialogue with God. And it is to this historical human being that Christ has come to talk. Now, regarding the Holy Trinity, the influence of Plotinus on Augustine's attempt to build a doctrine of the Holy Trinity is more than significant, is extremely deep. It will be complicated now to explain in which way it is so, but to give you an indication in terms of historical succession, so to say, you may wanna go check the works of Victorinus on the Trinity. Victorinus is the one who translated Plotinus in Latin. We don't have his translation anymore, but his translation was the one that Augustine much probably used. So already Victorinus had elaborated the doctrine of the Trinity, reusing literally and readapting for its goal Plotinian terminology. Augustine, through Victorinus, does the same. He reuses Plotinian terminology. Now, the interesting thing, though, about the Trinity, the Holy Trinity, is that unlike the one, God the Father is not unrelated to the rest. God the Father is, in a certain way, one of the things. The highest thing, to be sure, but is one of the things. So there isn't a perfect coincidence between the doctrine of the Holy Trinity and the Neoplatonic triad of one, nous, and soul. But there are points of overlap. And this overlapping is due to the fact that Christian theologians, Victorinus first of all, and then Augustine and the Greek fathers, use Plotinian terminology to talk about the Trinity. The other interesting thing that you may want to know is that the doctrine of the Trinity is not a mere religious doctrine, okay? And it doesn't concern only those who believe in Christianity. The doctrine of the Trinity is the central piece in the shaping of the understanding of the self that the Western tradition has elaborated. And its peak is reached with Kant, Leibniz, and later on Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel. It is in Hegel that it becomes completely apparent the kind of deep influence that the doctrine of the Trinity has had on Western thought, and particularly on the conception of the human being as a self-determined subjectivity, okay? All right. Then Gibault asks, so the shapeless has a high tension towards the one compared to those who I don't understand your question. You have to reformulate it. As it is, I don't understand it. Is Gibault still online?
Gibault, are you there?
Oh, hi, sorry, I'm muted. Hi, I'm muted, yes.
Yeah.
So do I need to explain my question?
Yeah, I don't understand it. You should clarify it.
It's so that I'm referring to whether, okay, because you say that it's shapeless and the shape, there's a shape part of it. So because from what you say just now, right? I'm having an understanding that as long as you gain shapes, you are losing the tensions towards the unity, and as you lose the shape, you are gaining more tension towards the one unity.
No. It's the opposite. I mean, when you lose shape, when you go towards disintegration, the tension is more feeble, and that's why you lose shape. Whereas the more you are tending towards the one, the more this tension is, what shall I say, solid and intense, the more you are gravitating around the one.
So, but for example, human, right, and human body and human thoughts and human soul, we should look at it like a soul has the highest tension towards the one, while thoughts have the second highest and the body has the least. In this way, we can see that the body has the highest tension while the thoughts has the second tension, while the soul has the least tension towards unity and one.
No, the soul has the most tension. The tension of the soul is the most intense. And when something is in tension, what happens? What does tension mean? Tension, think of a rubber, right? The more tensed it is, the straighter. The less tense, the most flaccid, right? So the soul is that thing that in us that tends most perfectly towards the one. In fact, once the body gets into the solution, the soul lives on. The soul never gets into the solution. Why? Because the soul is characterized by this constant tension towards the one, which our body doesn't have.
But soul is the one that doesn't have the shape, while the our body is not has a shape.
Of course, the soul has a shape. I mean, you don't have to think of shape in terms of something sensible, something that can be grasped only by sense perception. I mean, the triangle has a shape. Of course, it has a shape. And yet the triangle is nothing sensible. I mean, here in the physical domain, in the domain of sense perception, the true triangle doesn't exist. You have approximations of what the triangle is, but you don't have the triangle. So the soul is shape, is in fact more shape than the body. The only thing is that you cannot grasp it with your senses. But I mean, there's many things that you cannot grasp with your senses, and not because of that you doubt their existence. Okay.
I see. So in this case, the shape is something that is more of it's more of like an idea instead of shape as in what we see as a shape.
Yeah, I mean, but you see shapes because of the idea of the shape that you have. A dog doesn't see shapes. A cat doesn't see shapes. A cat, a dog, they react to impulses. That's it. But they don't see things, as we said in the beginning. Seeing a thing means seeing a shape. Shape is the word that we're using to translate the Greek ethos. Ethos means the shape that gives you an outlook. So whatever you see, if you see it, you're seeing a shape.
I see. So yeah. So usually we can actually grasp a shape or understand a shape without actually looking at it. It's not more. It's actually more than the vision shape in the vision.
It's not limited to the realm of sense perception, as we said.
Yes. Okay. Then that's clearer to me now. Thank you.
Okay. Then there is women. Let's see. If the one is the source of everything in the world, how can we reconcile Plotinus's ideas with that of the Aristotelian four causes? Oh, well, the Aristotelian four causes do not tell us about how should I say, the cosmological and ontological levels. They tell us about the logical categorization of how cause can be understood. And cause can be understood in four ways, right? But then this cause that can be understood in four ways coincides for Aristotle with one single reality, namely for Aristotle, the unmoved mover. The unmoved mover, Aristotle's God, right, is that thing that moves everything else. So is the causa efficiens insofar as it moves. Is the thing towards which all things that are moved tend, and they tend to go back to it, right? So is the causa finalis in that sense. Is the thing that gives shape, so is the causa formalis, and is the thing that gives matter, so is the causa materialis as well. So we are dealing with two different levels. When we talk about the causes as four, we're talking about the logical division of one single reality. But the reality is still the same. It's still one. Okay? So if I talk about myself as human being, as animal, as biped or two-footed, as mammal and blah, 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 and all these things, right? it's not that I am different things. I am one thing, but I can talk about this one thing in different ways. Right? So there is no contrast between Plotinus and Aristotle in that respect. There is a contrast at another respect, but I don't want to go into that because it's a bit complicated. Then, Yung Chung says, if the one is what everything tends toward, is the telos of making the one? Yes, the telos of making is to stay in unity, is to remain one. That's the telos of making. Pieces, as for general, pieces means making. Okay, pieces in Greek means making. And making understood by Plotinus, Plotinus uses interchangeably the two terms pieces and praxis. Aristotle instead distinguishes them. So pieces for Aristotle is the making whereby I make something with my hands. So I produce something external to me. Whereas praxis for Aristotle is that kind of doing whereby I shape myself. And this happens through any kind of activity the human being goes through. So you could have the political praxis, you could have the philosophical praxis, and so on and so forth. For Plotinus, instead, these two terms, pieces and praxis, are not distinguished. He understands them both under the umbrella, so to say, of production. So, Joel, Plotinus' philosophy is one of cause and effect, because the one as the preeminent cause is the effect of its own cause. But do the Gnostic and Christian understanding of things, as starting from a definitive beginning, avoid this relation of cause and effect in any way? In the sense that, in the case of Christianity, still attributes the beginning of all things as an effect of a making by God, the preeminent cause. No, Christianity and Gnosticism not only don't avoid this thing, but they make it even more dominant as the understanding of how things come into being. And that's one thing that Plotinus tries to fight against, this coming into being of things understood as the effect of the voluntary causing by an agent. So basically Plotinus wants to fight against the notion of voluntary agency that Christians and Gnostics bring into the understanding of the coming into being of things. However, does Plotinus get out altogether of the frame determined by cause and effect? No, he just displaces it to another level, but he remains completely within it. And yeah, as Joel aptly noticed, one other trait of this remaining within the frame determined by cause and effect can be traced down in the fact that Plotinus thinks of the one as the cause of itself, and hence cause of anything else. Right? Then,
can I clarify?
Yes.
You said that Plotinus is trying to fight against the notion of voluntary agency in cause and effect. Yeah. But doesn't cause and effect remove voluntary agency?
No, no, not necessarily. Cause and effect just says that one thing produces another thing. It doesn't say how this production takes place.
Correct, but doesn't that reduce all of our actions to the effect of a cause that is external to us?
In which case?
So cause and effect in that because I exist in a certain set of circumstances that's external to me, hence I am the way that I am.
Yeah.
And hence removing voluntary agency from myself. So
yeah.
Doesn't that kind of show how cause and effect instead tries to remove voluntary agency from the agent?
Not necessarily, because I can also say that I am the cause of what I am. which is the case of the way, which is the case as far as Christians and Gnostics think with God. God is the cause of himself. And God wills himself that way and wills things the way they are. And what is stressed in Christian and Gnostic thought is the arbitrariness of this willing, of this free willing. Plotinus in the treatise 6.8 tries to eliminate the arbitrariness. And he says, yes, the one wills itself and wills itself because it wills itself. That's it. Not out of some kind of thinking. So the difference is really subtle between the two systems. But as I said, in the end, Plotinus's thought doesn't come out of the frame of cause and effect. It remains deeply eradicated in it.
But in a sense, does the Hebrew understanding of God as I am also eliminate any form of discursive thought from that self-evidence?
Yeah, that's a good question. But the understanding of God as I am, right? Which is what God says in the book of Exodus. Is it the book of, no, the book of Genesis or Exodus? I don't remember. Exodus. Yeah, is when the Jews come out of Egypt. And, you know, for those of you who are not familiar with the Christian tradition, Moses goes to Mount Sinai to talk to God. And in that occasion, God gives him the commandments. And then Moses asks him, tell me who you are so that I can go down and tell my people who gave me these laws. And God replies with a quite enigmatic answer, Ayem Asher Ayem. I am who I am. As Joel is noticing, if you put it that way, then we can't talk anymore. I mean, I am who I am. The formulation is even strange, right? So basically, God is sort of saying, I am the undefinable. I cannot be named. There are no names for me. I just am, right? If you put it that way, yes, at that point there is no discursive thought. But yet, this non-discursive is the source, in itself non-discursive, is the source of any discursiveness, like the Plotinian one. Because it is out of his word that the world comes to be. I mean, it is because this I am says, let it be light, let it be this and that things come into being, on the one hand. On the other, the discriminating point between the Greek and Jewish perspective is to be found in the fact that this I am, first of all, is an I. So there is already some sort of definition that you don't find in the one, right? So if it is an I, it is something like a person, right? It's a self, on the one hand. On the other, it acts out of freedom, where freedom is understood as the arbitrariness of his own will. He does what he wants, unboundedly. Whereas the one does what it does and wants what it does. So it's reversed. But we're still within the frame of cause and effect in both cases. Okay, so Marcel, I don't quite understand what you said of Plotinus' view of making as cause and effect vis-a-vis Heidegger's search for the way out. Plotinus' advice against mechanistic understanding. Is it Plotinus' view that is problematic, or is it only the subsequent misinterpretation by later translators which distorts it into cause and effect? Where is cause and effect in Plotinus' thought? Think of it. I mean, what does Plotinus say? Plotinus says that, let's talk about the nous. The nous is the most evident case. How does the nous come into being? Because the nous forms itself. It forms itself out. It forms itself how? By fixing the shapelessness that it would be otherwise into a gaze that gravitates around the one. So the nous makes itself stand. The nous causes itself to a certain extent, and to another extent, to a certain other extent, it is caused by the one, which fixes it, which forces it to gravitate around itself. And the same remains true for all the other realities. So what is at work here is pieces, is making. And what is true for the nous is true for anything that has shape. Anything that has shape has that shape insofar as it makes itself, that is to say, insofar as it keeps itself gravitating around the one. Hence, it brings itself into an object of vision. What is this if not making? Plotinus himself, by the way, uses the word making, and making is the overarching word that keeps together praxis and theoria. They're both makings. Theoria is just the making of the highest level, whereas praxis is really the last byproduct, right? Once theoria gets completely exhausted. But we're still within the realm of making. Now, about Heidegger, we're going to see it as we read now the essay, so I don't want to rush into that. Suffice to say for now that Heidegger's perspective repudiates completely the understanding of being as a making of any sort, and tries to open up a new way. Now, I'm convinced that Plotinus, even though some people have thought that Plotinus might represent already a precursor, so to say, of the Heideggerian attempt, I'm convinced that Plotinus' thought doesn't offer any way out to this cause and effect bound thought, which has stretched all throughout the development of Western metaphysics, from Plato down to Heidegger, basically. Okay? But we're going to see these things better as we go. Now, I will stop here for today, but before we stop, I want you to tell you, if you haven't read the essay yet, don't rush into it, because by tomorrow, I hope to complete my own translation of it. Now, why am I translating it myself? I read this essay 2 years ago in German, and I never read it in the English version that yet I have. As I was rereading it in German, out of curiosity, I went to check certain passages in English, and I realized on actually several occasions that there are gross mistakes. Sometimes the translator even skips sentences. I will give you the details in a note to the translation. And as for the rest of the translation, is quite, how shall I say? well, sloppy. So don't read the translation that you have. Wait for mine to be uploaded. I'm going to upload it, I hope, by tomorrow night, if I manage. Okay, I have something like 10 pages left, more or less, to translate. So wait for that. Together with the translation, I'm going to have, if I manage, a few notes on key terms. As for Thursday, what we're going to do, we're going to still give time for some of your questions. And I hope that people who didn't perform very well at the oral exam come up with sensible questions by Thursday. So one part of the lecture is going to be dedicated to that. The second part of the lecture on Thursday is going to be dedicated to introducing you, those of you who never heard his name, to Heidegger and why we're reading him and what it is precisely that we're reading. Okay? All right? Okay, so I will stop here for tonight and we'll talk again on Thursday.
Okay, thanks, Prof.
Thank you.
Prof.
Bye.
See you.
Prof. Bye-bye, Prof.
Bye-bye.